We're going to open this up for questions, and I want to make sure everybody understands. At the end of this, you'll be able to accost these gentlemen as well, if you'd like to. But we're going to have a book signing out in the motorcycle gallery just ahead of us here, and you'll be able to purchase their books and have them sign them. So I please ask you to do that, because they've all, with the exception of Mark, come from far and wide to get here. And Andy drove here after he had flight trouble this morning and still made it on time, so it's rather remarkable. So kudos to we'd like to open it up, I'm sure, with the Studebaker crowd. So I knew there was going to be questions. Joe, you're in the front row. We're going to have Nancy take the mic over to everybody.
I just wonder what your thoughts are on the Studebaker and Mercedes subsidiary. That could have been very interesting, and also with Porsche. They even Studebaker with Porsche at one time.
Oh, I didn't know that.
I felt that the Mercedes it could have been something great, but never happened.
Well, to speak to the Porsche project, some of you may be aware Studebaker and Porsche were looking at a joint project in the early 1950s. It's funny you mentioned that, Joe. We were just looking at the contracts between Studebaker and Porsche as that related, actually signed by Dr. Porsche himself. And unfortunately, the project, after Studebaker engineers looked at it, and with the change in management in the early 1950s, I think whatever enthusiasm there was for that project was killed when Vance and Hoffman were leaving the company, and the Packard merger was taking place. It did show some promise, although the Studebaker engineers were a little jumpy about putting all their eggs in the Porsche basket. Coincidentally, apparently, Studebaker never fully paid for the contract amount, and their contention was that Porsche did not fulfill their end of the contract amounts, not providing a car suitable to the standards. So we have a letter in the file that basically they agreed to disagree, but the Porsche people were not going to file a lawsuit or anything.
Yeah, I'll add on the Mercedes-Benz connection. That was profitable for Studebaker. A lot of people don't realize Mercedes-Benz was one of the top-selling import cars back then. The big two were Volkswagen, of course, and Renault. But Renault made such a terrible car that by '63 nobody would buy one. And Mercedes was very well known, and even though they were a high-priced car, they sold in pretty good volume. The other Mercedes-Benz products, the Auto Union and DKW, were just absolute miserable flops because they were terrible cars. They were just too weird for America. They were European cars made for post-war Germany, and they just didn't fit in here in the United States. But the interesting thing, I don't know if you know what happened to Audi or to Auto Union and DKW, but they're called Audi now. And it would have been very nice if Studebaker was still selling Mercedes-Benz and Audis right now. But back then it was a very different car, and even with a price of $1,700, you couldn't sell them.
Yeah. Next question.
Certainly one of the tragedies of Studebaker was the 53, 54, 55 sedan. In your research, have you run across, first off, why was Studebaker management so insistent on building the sedan on a 114-inch wheelbase with a narrow track? And secondly, did anyone even consider, was there ever even a sketch made, a concept sketch made of a 53 sedan on the 120-inch wheelbase of the coupe, which would have been potentially a beautiful automobile?
As far as why did Studebaker management build such a small car on such a small wheelbase? Sometimes in the middle of the night, I cry out that over and over again. Why did they do that? And the reason is that I ask that is that when you build a coupe on a 120-inch wheelbase and then you build a sedan and a wagon on a much smaller wheelbase, you're basically dealing with two completely different cars. They style them to look like the coupe, but they don't share any parts. So if you're gonna have to stamp every fender and every door and every quarter panel and every roof brand new, if you're gonna have to tool up all that stuff, why not make it different, you know? They really should have made it a bigger car. And I think your idea of putting it on a 120-inch wheelbase, I think that would have been successful. That would have been, because size was really, in my opinion at least, was the problem with the 53, 54s.
Well, the Land Cruiser was on the 120-inch wheelbase in 53.
Yeah.
And from Bill, and you can pin a lot of that, I think, on the conventional wisdom of the day. You have to have, you know, sedans are the bread and butter models, and I think Studebaker's previous ratio was for every sport model, if you will, the two-door, the coupe, you'd sell 4 sedans. So going into the 53 model year, well, of course we have to have a new sedan to go with this, and people still wore hats in 1954, so you have to have sufficient hat room in the car, so let's raise the roof. And you know, the sedans, you know, and if anyone here is a sedan owner, I do love these cars because, say what you want, it made a darn good compact with the Lark. But yeah, the whole kind of, the compromises that you had to make and the management insistence that, gosh, the coupe looks so good. Well, think of how many we'll sell if we can make the sedan look just like the coupe. To which I'm like, you know, I like chocolate ice cream on my, or chocolate sauce on my ice cream, but I'm not going to put it on my carrots. So that's it's kind of that line of reasoning to me.
I often think about that myself when I'm researching. I see almost every book or source I'm looking at, it says the staple automobile in the United States in the early 50s was the large 6-passenger sedan. And they have a small sedan. And I think some of that just comes from the cost of, you've got the frame, you've got the stampings, you've got the body panels, and these cars are remarkably skinny now when you look at them versus the Chevys and the Buicks, and sometimes I think too maybe Lowy did go a little crazy on selling them on the styling of the Starliner, and then you've got the tail wagging the dog, so now you've got this beautiful long wheelbase Starliner, and now we got to do the sedans on a different line. I think they might have got things a little backwards.
Well, if you think of the position that it kind of put Lowy in, you're saying, you know, to not make the sedans look like the coupe, you know, his argument was, this is such a beautiful car, you have to produce this, then he has to argue against taking those same styling themes and putting it on the sedan. So I think he probably found himself, you know, in an uncomfortable position that he had to defend, or not defend, as the case may be.
All right, I have one more here.
In John Bridges' books, one of the things that I read was, and there are sketches of, you know, that Bob Burke and I think Bob Cotto had actually done studies of sedans on the 120-inch wheelbase as either a hard top or a post sedan, and you might address why that was rejected.
Well, I think I know what you're talking about. I think they actually did I don't know if it was a clay or something where they made a 4-door sedan with the coupe's proportions. And if that's what I'm thinking of. And it looked great, but kind of getting back to, I mean, when I was younger, I spent a lot of time in the back seat of a 56 Powerhawk, and I can't imagine keeping those same proportions and just making it 4 doors instead of 2. That would have been, I think, an untenable position to try to sell that as, we mentioned, the family 6-passenger sedan. And I'm certain that's why that did not come to the market. No one for your hat either.
I saw another question.
One more
We'll
question?
take one. Oh, we'll take 2 more questions.
Two
then
more?
we're gonna close off.
Oh my gosh, we have multiple questions. One over here.
Thank you. After the move to Canada in 1963, from what I've read and seen, Gordon Grundy was very gung-ho and very much committed to keeping Studebaker alive as an automobile manufacturer. But even if the diversified industrial company that Studebaker had become by that time had been willing to commit the resources necessary to remain as a viable car manufacturer, would the Canadian operation meet the challenges that were coming in the late 60s and the early 70s with, safety regulations and all of that sort of thing, given the fact that really the only product they had was a heavily facelifted 1953 car?
I've gotten a variation on that question in the past, and that kind of just the answer. I don't see how Studebaker would have come up with the resources to certify that body for the safety regs that came out in '68. I mean, you're talking a major investment. I know other automakers struggled with that even when they had, far more resources than Studebaker. Pat, more thoughts on that?
Well, I was just going to add, I've talked to some people that were connected with Studebaker Canada, and they were talking about riding the current car out to the early 70s. They knew sooner or later that wasn't going to be viable, but they had other plans. They were looking at the Japanese cars, like we know. One that I thought was interesting was the idea of importing Isuzus and rebadging them as Studebakers, and then building them eventually in the Hamilton plant. Something like that might have worked because you'd have a bigger company behind you. I always felt that in '61 or '62, if Studebaker and International Harvester had merged, that would have been just a dynamite company, because it would have opened Studebaker up, it would have doubled their dealer network, and it would have allowed International Harvester to get into areas where they didn't have any truck dealers. They were mostly in the rural areas. Studebaker was mostly in the city areas. I think it would have been a pretty good combination. And of course, with International, you had just gigantic sums of money that could have been used to revive Studebaker. So that would have been one good possibility, I thought.
And just down the road in Fort Wayne, Indiana.
Yes.
One more question, and then we're going to close that.
That's it.
A short one, STP.
I'm in favor of it.
Studebaker testing product? Any truth to that?
Any truth to the acronym?
That's what I had always heard. I don't know if it is or not. I want to bring up one thing, because I thought somebody was going to say, is there some little fact that you can tell us that nobody has ever told us before?
That wasn't on my list, but go for it.
Do you know the first automobile that Allstate Insurance ever insured, the very first car they insured, was a Studebaker Dictator? Yes, and they had a contest in the 80s to sell Allstate Motor Clubs. And I won a plaque, a walnut plaque, with a pewter Studebaker, 31 Studebaker Dictator on it. And I donated it to the museum because I said, boy, this really belongs. I bet you they don't have another one there. So that's a little known. Allstate's first insured automobile was a Studebaker.
Very good. Gentlemen, thank you for such a wonderful job. Thank you.
This is Pam from NortheastWheelsEvents.com at the 2019 Studebaker show at the AACA Museum. For more cool events like this, make sure you check NortheastWheelsEvents.com, SoutheastWheelsEvents.com, UKWheelsEvents.com, and while you're there, post and share your events. I'll see you at the shows.
How about this? We all slide down.